What's going on, guys? In this video today, we are checking out my graphics settings for PC on Warzone. We have a new map that just came out, Fortune's Keep. We also have adjustments to Caldera. I have multiple different setups, multiple different graphics cards, multiple different monitors. I have ran a lot of tests on these settings, and I'm going to give you all the best settings I could possibly give for you and show y'all exactly what I use for the best FPS to quality balance. We're jumping in. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you check out the channel. I do different things on YouTube. Today, we're doing graphic settings. I'm also live on Twitch every day. Stop by, drop a follow. We're jumping in. First off, in your settings and graphics, I am on full screen borderless. That's because I have multiple monitors that I run off my gaming PC. I also have my streaming PC, but on here, it's easier for me to move around if I can have everything on my gaming PC. So that's why I run that. If you have one single monitor, you should absolutely run full screen. Full screen, from my experience, gives about 5 to 10% more frames. So, I mean, if you're running 90 on full screen borderless, you'd be running around 100 on full screen. And that varies based on the graphics card, but that is just kind of like the general mean that I have found. Of course, most of these are going to be set by default to your monitor, to your graphics card, your refresh rate of your monitor. Make sure your render resolution is on 100. There is no real reason to really ever change this unless you have a very, very low-end graphics card and you want to tune this down. But honestly, you can find other ways in here to bring performance down to meet your card other than messing with this. And if you want to go above, I mean, if you go above 100 gives you like 100% of what your actual resolution is. If you go over 100, you are going to start losing frames so fast. And if you go under, you're really not going to gain a lot. Dynamic resolution by default is disabled. Keep it off. The dynamic resolution frame rate target, that doesn't matter because it's already disabled. Aspect ratio automatic, VSync, it should be disabled. There are very few scenarios where there is ever a reason to have that. I can't even think of one. Frame rate limit, you can do unlimited, doesn't matter. I do custom just because when I'm in the menus and when I'm on my other screens, I don't need my GPU cranking up to 100%. So I keep these on a custom frame rate limit of 60 while I'm in the menus and while it's out of focus. Brightness, that is up to you depending on what your monitor settings are and whatnot. I bounce around in between 50 and 55. Gamma 2.2, I fully recommend you just keep that on. If you have an NVIDIA card, you'll have this thing for NVIDIA highlights. I would highly recommend you keep that disabled. It kills FPS to have it on, and you can find other programs to record your gameplay without using it. NVIDIA Reflex low latency, also if you have an NVIDIA card. Most of the time, I would say to keep this enabled. It's not really going to hurt you to have it enabled. Enabled plus boost, though, I have found through my experience, if I switch this to enabled plus boost, most of the time, because it keeps your power draw up on your GPU, my GPU normally runs hotter, and I really don't see any difference between enabled and enabled plus boost on this. I would recommend enabled. If we move right over from display to quality settings, field of view, that is all personal preference. I bounce around in between 110 and 120. Camera movement, absolutely should be on 50%. If there was a 0, you should have it on 0. Streaming quality, you have a low and normal option. If you look down here on our VRAM usage, normal takes more VRAM. I will tell you right now, this says the low setting favors texture performance over quality, and normal favors quality over performance. I honestly can't see a difference. I've tried this on 1080p, 1440p on 6GB, 8GB, 12GB VRAM cards. As for the quality textures, I haven't noticed a difference. Honestly, FPS wise, there's hardly any difference either. It really doesn't matter. I normally stick with low. On to texture resolution. Texture resolution is your biggest thing in here for taking VRAM usage. I normally stick on normal to high just because I like the game to be as clear as possible so I can see enemies a farthest away. Honestly, low, normal, high texture, you're not going to notice the difference. The biggest gap you're going to find between the visuals of any of these is between low and very low. If you can run low, I would absolutely recommend that. Honestly, above that doesn't really matter. Right now, I'm on normal. I bounce around. Texture filter, anisotropic. I recommend you keep this on high. It really doesn't affect anything FPS-wise. It doesn't use more VRAM. And you get a little bit sharper images on certain textures. Just keep it on high. Particle quality, absolutely keep this on high. When things explode, if you look at the picture right here, You can see a lot more clearly through this smoke when it's on high. Things are a lot more blurry, a lot harder to see through explosion stuff if this is on low. Absolutely keep that on high. Bullet sprays and impacts, that's up to you. I just like it on. Tessellation, another one that has minimal FPS effect, minimal VRAM effect. You go disabled to all and you don't have any change in VRAM. This one also just makes textures a little sharper. I keep it on. Dismemberment and gore, that one is up to you. I keep it on disabled. On-demand texture streaming, I'd recommend keep this on disabled. I've tried it on before. I know it was having, when Caldera first dropped, there was packet loss issues. I've never seen that, but honestly, I see no difference. The only thing on-demand texture streaming really does is mainly for character textures. So whether a person's pants have a little bit more definition on their character, it really doesn't matter to keep that on and use up more of your internet power while you're playing. Filmic Strength, you'll see this right here. I see a lot of the people that do the graphics videos, they say, they read this off and they're like, if anti-aliasing option is not set to T2X or Filmic T2X, set this to 1 to avoid visual noise. There's no way to avoid visual noise in this game. This thing on 1 or 0, no matter what card I've been on, what monitor I've been on, I've never seen a difference between Filmic Strength. Leave it off. Film grain, leave it off. DLSS is great. You'll get tons of extra frames and you can try the different levels. It basically makes the quality less and less, but then upscales it to kind of make it look decent again. And it does not look bad unless you're moving. I can't deal with the blur when you're moving. If you're just aim down sight looking far, it really looks no different and you will get much better frames. But the main time you're going to want extra frames is normally when you're in action, moving around, and it just adds this blur. I had it on for a while and I was okay with it, but I would recommend just leaving it disabled. Anti-aliasing, post-process effect to reduce perceived jagged edges in the final rendering. These are not perceived jagged edges. If you have anti-aliasing off and you've ever seen, it is terribly jagged. I use 1x and I would not recommend any more than that. I played around with a million different settings between 2x and Filmic. I used 1x for a long time, went to 2x for a long time. And when I came back to 1x, it was mind-blowing how much clearer 1x is. You get used to 2x because what they do is they just blur the edge of everything so it doesn't look jagged. But that blur is actually huge. If you play on 2x for a month and you move it down to SMAA 1x, you will absolutely notice the difference. I would say in most cases, keep this at 1x, or if you can deal with the jagged edges, most likely if you have 1440p or 4K monitor, you're more likely to be okay with off. On 1080p, I would absolutely do 1x and I would not go higher. Each increment you go up for anti-aliasing, you lose a ton of frames. And you lose a ton of frames and you get a blurrier picture. Now that blurrier picture helps because it's over sharpened to start with, but just 1x, that's the sweet spot. Depth of field should always be off, not a question. World motion blur, absolutely off. Weapon motion blur, off. Shadow map resolution. Shadows take a ton of VRAM and you lose a lot of FPS for every increment you go up. I would say play on low. Low is fine. I still notice plenty of times when I see someone's shadow above me and I am able to notice it and know that they're there. You're not going to notice it any better if this is on high or extra or anything else. Keep it on low, save your FPS. Cache, spot shadows, cache, sun shadows. I recommend enable. There are cases when you have a very low amount of VRAM, like a 4 VRAM card, where this wouldn't help. But I promise you, with 6 gigabytes of VRAM or above in your card, you will absolutely get increased FPS from these two settings. Particle lighting, I keep this on high. This kind of same earlier as particle quality. It doesn't really affect FPS or VRAM too much, so I like to keep it as clear as possible. Direct XRay tracing, I mean, if you're playing with that, you're not trying to get high FPS anyway. Keep it disabled. Ambient occlusion disabled. Screen space reflections. I like reflections. I have had times where I played with this on. It does cut down on a little bit of FPS. It's not a huge cut down, but with this off, you will not see reflections in like puddles of water. And there's times, kind of like shadows, where you maybe could notice somebody from that, but most likely not. I would say keep it on disabled. Those are my current settings for Season 4 Warzone. If you have any questions, stop by the stream and ask. I absolutely nerd out over this stuff. Twitch.tv/Hoopsick. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.